Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty fundamental today. You know, like the core building blocks of English.
Ah, you mean the alphabet. Yeah, it might seem basic, but like you said, building blocks, it all starts there.
Exactly. We're using this cool podcast for English learners as our guide today.
Smart move. Those folks really break things down. And when you think about it, reading, writing, speaking, it all goes back to those 26 letters.
That's what I find so fascinating, just 26 letters to make thousands upon thousands of words.
Efficient, right. But then there's a twist.
Oh, yeah. The sounds those letters make can change depending on the word.
It's almost like they have multiple personalities, which makes things a bit more complex.
Well, let's jump in. This podcast, they actually start by having the hosts, Shiro and Rehana, recite the alphabet together.
Good idea. It's like setting the stage, and it's actually how they recommend people start learning it.
Makes sense. And then they break it down into smaller groups.
Much less intimidating than tackling all 26 at once.
For sure. So first up, A, B, C, D, and E. What I noticed is they give you a word for each letter to really hear the sound.
Like with C, they'd say cat, right. But then to show how it can change, they'd also give you scent.
Oh yeah, one letter, two different sounds. That's a perfect example.
It shows how those multiple personalities come into play.
And they do that with G too. So have goat, hard G, but then you get giant, and it's more like a J.
Makes you realize all the little nuances, huh?
Totally. Now on to the next group. F, G, H, I, and J.
Here they highlight how I can be short, like in igloo, but also long, like ice.
Those vowels, they can be tricky.
They really can, but that's why hearing the words, seeing how it works in context is so helpful.
Right. Okay, next is K, L, M, N, and O. Now, these felt pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah, those are generally less tricky, but Sharo and Rehana still give you those example words. It all helps with repetition, solidifying those sounds.
Oh, and they suggest singing the alphabet song too.
Catchy tunes are always a good memory trick.
That reminds me. Sometimes if I have to remember something, I make a little jingle or rhyme.
See? It works. Music helps your brain lock it in.
Okay, where were we? Ah, yes. P, Q, R, S, and T.
With Q, they point out that it almost always hangs out with you to make that K-O-B sound, like queen.
It's like they're a team.
Right. And then S, it has a double life too, just like C, sun versus rose, you get that S and then that Z sound.
So many things to pay attention to. All right, last group. U, V, W, X, Y, and Z.
Almost there.
Sheridan and Rehani highlight U and how it can be short like in umbrella or long like in unicorn.
Those long and short vowel sounds can really trip you up.
They sure can. And then V and W, those could be tricky for some people.
Yeah, those involve some pretty specific tongue and lip movements. They actually dedicate a whole segment later on to sounds that are especially challenging.
It's amazing how much goes into making those sounds.
It is. But for now, we've officially made it through the entire alphabet.
26 letters down. And that actually covers a big part of what you wanted to focus on.
Right. You mentioned mastering the alphabet, and we've done just that. But like we said, there's so much more to explore when it comes to sounds, pronunciation, and all those tricky bits.
Well, let's take a deep breath, maybe grab a drink of water, and then we'll dive into those challenges head on.
Okay, so we've tackled the individual letters. But there are some sounds that can be real tongue twisters, especially for people just learning English.
You're right. And our podcast hosts, they know this. They actually spend a good chunk of time talking about these challenging sounds.
It's interesting, isn't it? The things we take for granted in our own language.
I know, like they start with the th sound, and they point out that it doesn't even exist in some languages.
That's gotta be tough, trying to learn a sound that's completely foreign to you.
Right. Rehana, she gives this tip. Practice slowly and really exaggerate the sound at first.
Makes sense. You gotta train your tongue to do something new.
Exactly. And they use words like think, thank, and this as examples. Words where that fifth really stands out.
I like that. It's all about getting that tongue placement right.
And then, V and W, those can trip people up too.
Oh, yeah. They look so similar when you write them. And they sound kind of similar too if you're not used to them.
Exactly. So Shero and Rehana, they point out how V involves your teeth touching your bottom lip, like we say van.
Uh-huh. And then with W, you round your lips. More like water.
It's amazing how subtle these differences can be.
Isn't it? But those subtle differences make all the difference in how the word sounds.
Oh, and you know what else they do? They give you tongue twisters to practice.
Those are the best.
Yeah.
So fun, and they really make you pay attention to how you're saying the words.
Right, like they've got the classic one. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
Love that one. But they also have she sells seashells by the seashore.
Oh, yeah. And Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers.
So good. Those are going to be fun to try.
And you know, what I really appreciate is that Shero and Rehana, they emphasize that it's okay to make mistakes. It's a journey.
Absolutely. Language learning, it's not about being perfect right away.
It's about making progress.
Exactly. Small steps lead to big results. Speaking of progress, remember you were also curious about numbers.
Oh, yeah. That was another big one on your list. And guess
Let's
what?
cover that too.
They totally do. A good chunk of the podcast is dedicated to understanding and using numbers in English.
Perfect timing then. Let's jump right in.
Okay, so they start with the basics, counting from 1 to 10. And they even encourage listeners to use those numbers in simple sentences.
Like, I have 3 apples.
Yes. Or, there are 7 days in a week. It's like putting those numbers to work right away.
That's smart, getting comfortable using them in real-life situations.
And then, they point out how tricky the teen numbers can be. 13 versus 30.
Oh, yeah. Those can be tough to keep straight, especially when you're first starting out.
Right. They give some good tips on how to pronounce them clearly so you don't get mixed up.
And they explain how the whole number system works in English, right? Like how you build those larger numbers, 20, 30, 40, and so on.
They do, and I love how they connect it back to real-world examples like there are 60 minutes in an hour.
Or the speed limit is 55 miles per hour. It makes it so much easier to understand when you see those numbers in action.
And they don't stop at whole numbers. They go into fractions and decimals too.
Yeah.
Even percentages, which, are everywhere, like sales, statistics, all that.
I'm impressed. They really pack a lot into this episode. And, what I appreciate is that they don't just focus on how to say the numbers. They give you phrases for using them in conversation, like, how much does this cost? And it costs $10.
So practical. And speaking of practical, they even cover how to say prices in different currencies.
It's like they've thought of everything. And you know what else? They teach you how to express quantities using words.
Like a few, some, many, a lot of.
Exactly. Those are so useful when you don't know the exact number. And hey, they even threw in some cultural insights.
Oh yeah, they talked about how certain numbers can have different meanings in different cultures.
Like the number 4 being unlucky in some Asian cultures. It was really interesting.
It really makes you think, even numbers, something we think of as universal, can have different connotations depending on where you are in the world.
It goes to show how important cultural awareness is when you're learning a new language. It's not just about the words and grammar.
Right. You have to understand the context, the culture, everything. It's fascinating.
It is. And you know what? This whole segment on numbers, it's such a good example of how to approach language learning in a practical way. It's not just memorizing words. It's about understanding how to use them in real life.
Totally. Shiro and Rehana, they really do a great job of bringing it all together. Vocabulary, pronunciation, grammar, even culture.
So I'm curious, where do you think our deep dive will go next? They've covered letters, pronunciation, numbers. What's left?
Well, we've got the letters, we've got the numbers, but, there's this whole other layer to language, this system for putting it all together.
You mean grammar?
Yeah, grammar, the rules of the game.
And you mentioned in your notes that you wanted to understand how to build sentences in English.
Exactly. So I bet that's where Shero and Rehana are headed next in their podcast, to the world of sentences.
Sounds about right. I mean, they've laid the groundwork with the alphabet and numbers. Now it's time to see how it all fits together.
I'm sure they'll start with the basics, like what even makes a sentence a sentence?
The fundamentals, right. They might talk about the subject of a sentence, the one doing the action.
And the predicate, the part that tells us what the subject is doing or being.
Exactly. Simple stuff, but so important.
I bet they'll use those clear examples like the cat sat on the mat.
Oh, yeah. Those short, simple sentences are perfect for illustrating the point.
And then they might branch out to different types of sentences, like those that make statements.
Declarative sentences, and then the ones that ask questions.
Interrogative sentences.
Right. And the ones that give commands.
Imperative. Oh, and we can't forget about those sentences that express strong emotion.
Exclamatory sentences. Those are fun. It's amazing how many different types of sentences we use without even thinking about it.
It's like all these tools for communication. But it's interesting.
What's that?
Punctuation. I bet they talk about punctuation because that plays a huge role in how we understand written English.
It does. It's like the secret code that helps us decipher the meaning.
Think about it. A simple comma can completely change the meaning of a sentence.
Totally. It's powerful stuff. And then there are verb tenses. That's another area that can be tricky for English learners.
Oh, yeah, verb tenses are key because they let us talk about time, past, present, future.
It's like having a time machine built right into the language.
Exactly. I'm sure they'll start with the present tense, what's happening right now.
And move on to the past tense. What already happened.
And of course, the future tense, all about what's yet to come.
And don't forget those irregular verbs, the ones that don't follow the rule.
Oh, like go, went, gone.
Yeah.
Those can be tough to remember.
But they're also what makes English so unique. It's a language with so much history.
Right. You can see that history reflected in the grammar.
Absolutely. And I'm sure Shiro and Raihana will point that out too.
They always do such a great job with context. But, once they cover verbs, they'll have to move on to other parts of speech.
Oh, yeah. Nouns, pronouns, adjectives, adverbs, all the essential building blocks.
It's like they're giving you this toolkit to build sentences.
And the more tools you have, the more you can express yourself.
Exactly. It's like once you understand the rules of the game, then you can really start playing.
And having fun with it. I have no doubt that Shiro and Raihana will make even grammar seem fun and approachable.
They really do have a knack for that. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive today. We've covered a lot of ground from the alphabet to numbers and even a peek into grammar.
It's been quite a journey, but remember, this is just the beginning. Language learning is an ongoing process.
So keep practicing, keep exploring, and most importantly, have fun with it.